Welcome to this week's midweek Space Startup News. As usual, I'll be going over space news on websites and blogs and social media posts that I've seen. So the big story this week is the NASA conference talking about the moon base. So I'm not going to cover that in this video because I'll be doing a dedicated video later this week covering all the information we got from this conference. And that video should be out on Friday. First of all, we're on X and you can follow along at Space Startup Hub. I post links to my videos on there. Please follow on X. And the first story this week is related to the NASA announcement on the moon base. And that is an article from the EuropeanSpaceflight.com. And this is on Italy's lunar habitat that's cleared NASA systems review. So let's quickly read this article. And I've highlighted a few areas. So the multi-purpose habitat, you can see a render here, or MPH for short, is a module that's been cleared by NASA Review Board to progress towards a preliminary design review in 2027. The first MPH module is expected to launch in 2023. If you're not familiar with this module, it's a habitat and probably the very first habitat module in NASA's moon base. It's been developed by the Italian Space Agency, that's ESA, and it's been built by Thales Alenia Space in Italy. So let's continue reading the article. It goes on to say that NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman paused the development of the Lunar Gateway space station and shifted focus towards building a base on the moon's surface. Italy's MPH modules were identified as a key element of the initiative. So Italy and NASA, so this is not a European Space Agency agreement. This is a bilateral agreement between Italy and NASA. And they've signed a statement of intent to cooperate on the development of the US-led lunar surface base, including habitation modules, communication systems, and scientific activities on the lunar surface. According to the agreement, Italy would also secure at least one seat for an Italian astronaut on a future Artemis mission to the moon. And it has to be to the moon now because the gateway has been scrapped. And on the 19th of May 2026, so not long ago, a NASA review board completed a combined systems definition review and systems requirements review for the MPH module's design. And the project has been cleared to proceed towards a preliminary design review in 2027. And we have a quote here from the Italian Space Agency. "This is a decisive milestone that brings us significantly closer to the ultimate goal, providing humanity with a fundamental technology infrastructure to live, work, and finally permanently inhabit the moon," unquote. And preparations for the preliminary design review are expected to take 12 months. That is an article from the EuropeanSpaceflight.com website. And as usual, I'll link all those articles in the video description. We do have another render of the MPH, the multi-purpose habitat, and you can see two of them. In fact, you can see three of them here, one in the background and two in the foreground. So it does have wheels. It can move around on the surface. So you can think of it more like a camper van. It's a small pressurized volume that astronauts can live in, but they can also move around on the surface of the moon. That is the first story this week, and it links into NASA's base camp announcement, as this will likely be the very first habitat module in the Artemis base camp. Okay, let's move on to our second story this week. Okay, our second story this week is on, if I bring it up, and it's on ESA selects consortium for Lunar Remote Camp Study. ESA is the European Space Agency, and this article is from the Exploration Company, which if you're a regular on my channel, you'll be very familiar with. It's a company that's working on cargo vehicles to low Earth orbit, and it's scheduled to fly to the International Space Station in 2028. But they're also part of this consortium. So let's read the article, just the highlighted areas. We have a render of the concept, and it's described as a robotic asset shelter with potential extension to crew shelter. So in the press release from the consortium, it says, as a next step forward in lunar operations, Saga Space Architects, the Exploration Company, and Space Application Services have been awarded a contract for the European Space Agency's Lunar Remote Camp Study. To support ESA's lunar surface operations, the concept study will be defining robotic first surface shelter which can later be adapted to support short duration crew use. So this isn't a main base camp. It's just an outpost that crews could potentially use for a week or two, perhaps on the rim of a crater, for instance. They could do some studies, surveying, leave some equipment, spend a week or two there, and then travel back to the main base camp. It's talking about a deployable shelter approach intended to protect surface equipment and extend robotic mission capabilities in the challenging lunar environment. So the shelter will protect lunar equipment from extreme temperature swings, abrasive dust, radiation, and micrometeoroids. It can store equipment and spares, keep hardware within safe temperature limits, and provide basic infrastructure functions such as power distribution, data links, and local communications support. And then list the 3 companies involved in this. So Saga Space Architects, which is a company I'm not really that familiar with. Then we have the exploration company, which I've covered on this channel extensively. And they're working on the Nix spacecraft family that is designed for cargo missions to low Earth orbit. And then we have Space Application Services, or SAS, that has contributed to a wide range of ESA missions and has long-standing expertise in lunar surface systems. And they are continuing to support Europe's ambition for sustainable activities on the lunar surface. So that is the article, and this is the exploration company. There's a Nix vehicle. That is a cargo vehicle they're working on that is currently being qualified by NASA to head to the International Space Station in 2028. But they're also working on this Lunar Remote Camp concept. We do have a video from another company that kind of explains the remote camp concept. So let's just watch that now. So on the lunar surface, and you can see there's HLS landing site. So you have Starship, a lunar starship that's landed. Then you have an LTV, and you have crew moving from the lander towards the remote base camp that's already set up. So for instance, Shackleton Crater. So it would be on the rim of the Shackleton Crater. And you don't want to land there. It's too dangerous. You land in a flat area, and then you drive to your outpost. You can have multiple outposts near different craters or any area of interest. And there is the base camp, remote base camp. You just drive up to the base camp on your LTV, your lunar terrain vehicle, and then you can work at that site for a week or two, and you can live in the outpost for a week or two. It will have skylights and so on. It will have power, communications, and so on. So that's the idea of a remote outpost. So that's interesting, and that's another potential contribution that Europe can provide to the NASA moon base concept. So we've covered the habitation modules with the MPH from the Italian Space Agency. We've covered remote bases, remote outposts. That's the ESA study. So let's move on to the next story this week. Okay, our next story is on Isar Aerospace partnering with maritime launch services for orbital launch readiness from Nova Scotia. So let's just read the article. This is on Isar Aerospace's website. So the article says that Isar Aerospace and spaceport operator Maritime Launch Services, or MLS, have signed a letter of intent to advance sovereign orbital launch readiness from Nova Scotia in Canada. The agreement brings together Isar Aerospace's orbital launch system and MLS's launch site, Spaceport, Nova Scotia. It's strategically located for launches to support reliable access to mid to high inclination and polar orbits for Earth observation and communication satellites and constellations, supporting commercial and government missions. It means in the future they could launch mid-inclination missions, which they can't at the moment. So Alexandra Dalano, Vice President Mission and Launch Operations for Isar Aerospace, said, "We are well positioned to enable sovereign access to space for Canada, Germany, and allied nations. By joining forces with MLS, we are establishing a path to rapid deployment of sovereign launch capability from North American soil," unquote. And we have a quote from Stephen Mathieu, President and CEO of Maritime Launch Services, who are providing the spaceport. He says this will strengthen Canada's role in the global space economy while helping build reliable sovereign access to space, unquote. Isar Aerospace seeks to expand its launch services to cover mid to high inclination orbits, and their launch vehicle called Spectrum is capable of deploying commercial and defense payloads of up to 1,000 kilos. Isar Aerospace currently operates its dedicated polar launch site in Andøya, Norway. The site is positioned to support the orbital trajectories required by a broad range of commercial and defense companies, and this is because of the increasing pressure to deploy and maintain key satellite constellations without reliance on third-party launch providers, as geopolitical instability continues to reshape national security planning. So that is the article. And we can have a look now at the Spectrum launch vehicle. This is Isar Aerospace's rocket. It flies from Argonaut in Norway, and we can see the launch site here. As you can see, it's very high north. The latitude is 69 degrees. It's Arctic weather, so it's quite difficult to launch because of the high winds. So let's just run some video from Isar Aerospace so you get an idea of the location and the vehicle. So this is a two-stage vehicle that can launch about 1,000 kilos to orbit. It already had its first launch last year. That failed after 30 seconds. They're now trying to launch for a second time. There's been various issues, technical issues, and also the weather is a constraint, high winds and so on. So that is the launch site. Having a launch site in Canada will be very beneficial. They can launch into different inclinations. At the moment, they can only launch missions that are 90 degrees to 110 degrees. So that covers polar missions and sun-synchronous orbits. They can't do mid-inclination orbits. So you can see the problem that Isar Aerospace has from their one dedicated launch site at Argonaut. Their minimum inclination is 90 degrees, that's due north, up to 110 degrees. So they can fly sun-synchronous orbits very efficiently, or polar orbits, but they cannot fly mid-inclination. There's range restrictions on the launch site. Due to flying over populated areas, it's banned. Now, if you compare that, for instance, with Saxford Spaceport, where Rocket Factory Augsburg will be flying from, they can fly at 6-degree inclination. So they're able to fly more missions for more customers than Isar Aerospace can. And if you look at the current launch sites, you have Saxford and Argonaut, which are available now. In the future, you'll have S-Range Space Center, but again, that's at 68 degrees, and maybe Sutherland in the future at 58. All the European spaceports basically constrained on inclination due to their high latitude. So having a spaceport in Canada would allow Isar Aerospace to target more missions and support more customers. And if the weather's an improvement over Argonaut, potentially there'll be more flight opportunities. Okay, our final story this week is on an article. So this article from EuropeanSpaceflight.com is titled Redwire delivers Argonaut robotic arm prototype. So Redwire has delivered an initial prototype of a robotic arm that can be used aboard the European Space Agency's Argonaut lunar lander, the lander's inaugural mission, which is expected to launch in 2030. In early 2024, ESA awarded contracts to Redwire and Poland's PIAP Space to deliver an initial prototype of the manipulator for Argonaut payload needs and unloading support, or MANUS system. It's a multi-use robotic arm for a future lunar lander platform. So Redwire built an initial prototype of the robotic arm to validate the system's core features. And according to Redwire, the robotic arm can be used to load and unload cargo, transfer power to surface assets such as rovers, and collect lunar regolith or lunar soil samples for analysis. In late April 2026, so just about a month ago, ESA opened its Argonaut 1 moon robotic payload mission call, seeking proposals to demonstrate key robotic manipulation technologies for European robotic moon missions. And this robotic arm can be used for autonomous regolith sampling, lander inspection, and payload deployment tasks. And it says further down that work has started on the first Argonaut lunar lander. The descent element that will deliver it to the lunar surface is already underway under an €862 million contract awarded to Thales Alenia Space in January 2025. The Argonaut lunar lander will be launched aboard an Ariane 6-4 and will be capable of delivering 1,500 kilos of cargo to the surface of the moon. The lander is designed to be capable of touching down with a landing accuracy of approximately 250 meters. It is also built to withstand the extreme conditions of the lunar night, with the ability to remain operational for the full 14-day lunar night period. So that is the article from EuropeanSpaceflight.com. We've now covered some key contributions of Europe towards the Artemis Base Camp. We've covered the MPH and we've covered the Argonaut lunar lander. When we look at this documentation from NASA's budget for the financial year 2026, we can see that the MPH, the multi-purpose habitat, that's a habitation module for the Artemis Base Camp, and the Argonaut elements, that is the Argonaut cargo lander we just looked at, are part of the HLS program for implementation of the overall Artemis architecture. So these two core elements are now part of the HLS program to support the Artemis base camp, either as habitation modules or as cargo landers for logistics. So they're both key elements. And let's just look at this animation of the Argonaut lunar lander. So it's launched on an Ariane 6.4 and it heads towards the moon and then softly lands on the moon, hopefully. And then there's a ramp so you can deploy rovers, which can then sample the regolith and then return the regolith back to the lander for analysis. So you can see there's a robotic arm that's collected the regolith and then it's loaded back onto a ascent element, which can then blast off. This has gone to the gateway, so that obviously that's not true anymore. The gateway's been cancelled, but you get the concept. You can do some kind of regolith return mission using Argonaut, and then you can analyze the regolith when it gets back to Earth. And we have this other animation as well. So this is on the Moonlight data relay satellite for the moon. So you can see it targets the South Pole, giving continuous communication, even in craters. So this would be the base camp. And you can see an astronaut and you can see the satellites from the surface and communicate with the satellites. And there you can see the Argonaut lunar lander on its way to the moon. So this is what it looks like. And it can carry 1.5 tons of cargo to the surface. And that's a Moonlight data relay satellite. And there is the lunar lander on its way to the moon. And then it deploys the cargo onto the surface. And you've got the satellite communicating with the lander, communicating with the rover. So you've got an end-to-end service there. That is some of the technologies and assets that Europe and the European Space Agency will be sending to the moon as part of NASA's Artemis base camp. So my next video this week will cover in detail the announcement from NASA on the moon base plans, basically covering everything that was announced with some thoughts and opinions. This space news is kind of giving you an idea of Europe's contribution to the NASA base camp. So thank you for watching. Please leave your comments and thoughts below, and we'll discuss at the live stream at the weekend. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.